Scola Secunda, capitoli decimi terti. All right. So this is a very special scola because we will actually talk about the Roman calendar. It's going to be quite dense, by the way, because we will express how, well, we will review the months. We will talk about the division of the month. You may not be familiar with that, but the Roman month is quite different from ours in the sense that the Romans were not using first, second, third, and so on. They were using a very specific system and how to express the dates in Latin. So this is quite special. It is also quite difficult, by the way. It is quite confusing for beginners and advanced students alike. So don't be discouraged if you don't get this the first time. It's something that you will have to be reviewing for a long time, maybe forever. Every time you want to use the Roman dates, maybe you will have to review some of these topics or some of these themes, all right? So don't be discouraged by that. First of all, the names of the months, okay? The month names are originally adjectives, but they are often used on their own as masculine nouns, with the noun mensis understood or implied. So when you say Januarius, Februarius, Martius, all these are adjectives. They are more properly used with the noun mensis, which is a masculine noun. Mensis means month. But in practice, we use these adjectives as nouns. So we simply say Januarius, just like in English we say January. Just keep in mind that they are actually adjectives. What can I tell you about this? Well, not much, except that most of these adjectives, most of the month names, belong to the second declension. Januarius, Februarius, Martius, Maius, Junius, Julius, Augustus. All of these are second declension. So Januarius, genitive, Januari. Februarius, ablative, Februario, and so on. A few of them, 5 actually, belong to the third declension. Aprilis is like, let's say, ovis, something like that, because the genitive is aprilis. So the nominative is aprilis and the genitive is aprilis, a little bit like ovis, right? Just remember that the ablative is actually ends in E, all right? It's kind of an exception in a sense, and not in E, because if you remember, the ablative of ovis is not ovi. Ovi is the dative. The ablative is ove. But with aprilis, both the dative and the ablative end in E, all right? So there's that. The last 4 months, and actually the ones that whose names are derived from their old position in the calendar. So remember, September from septem, October from octo, November from novem, December from decem. These names are derived from their old position in the calendar. These are also third declension. All right. So third declension, September, genitive, septembris. October, genitive, octobris. November, genitive, novembris. December, genitive, decembris. And also, just like aprilis, the ablative ends in E and not in E, as you would expect. Just as a reminder, Januarius comes from the Roman god Janus, the one with the two-faced god. Februarius, actually, we don't know. It's kind of a mystery where this Februarius comes from. Martius comes from the Roman god Mars, the god of war. Aprilis, also, we don't know. We're not sure, but it seems to come from the verb aperire. So Aprilis is the month that opens, because that's the month maybe, well, in the old Roman calendar that used to begin in March with Martius, the month of war. Aprilis was the second one, so quite close to the beginning, right? And it was also the month in which the year was opened with Aprilis in a sense, but also the flowers opened, right? So Aprilis is the month of full spring, so to speak. So that's the reason why it's called Aprilis. And also maybe the first month was derived from Mars, the god of war, because maybe people think is when wars used to begin or renew. Because during winter, there were not wars. It was too cold or something. So maybe that's the reason why actually the first month is dedicated or named after Mars, because they started wars. Maius, I'm not sure. Maybe there is a reason it's called Maius, but I don't know it. Junius, same thing. I'm not sure. Julius and Augustus, as you may know, Julius from Julius Caesar, Augustus from Octavianus Augustus, the emperors, right? Who named the months after them. The division of the month, and this is the tough part in a sense. So pay attention to this. 3 days in every month, all of them, by the way, all of the months, had their own special names. All of them are feminine plurals. And what are those 3 names or 3 days? The first, the fifth, and the 13th. The first is called kalendae. Kalendae, you see, feminine plural, first declension. Calends, we could translate. And it's derived from the verb calare, which means to call. Why? Because apparently people believe ancient Roman priests used to call the people into an assembly to explain to them what were the festivities of the month. So in the first of the month, this priest called all the people to, announce and enlist all the festivities and duties and sacrificial days and so on. So it was like a sort of assembly to explain to them all this, to explain them the calendar, essentially, to explain them the month, what's going to happen during the month. This is just a theory, by the way. People are not really sure that kalendae come from calare. Some people believe maybe it comes from the Etruscan. In any ways, our word calendar comes from kalendae. And by the way, in Greek, there is the verb kaleo, which means to call. So there's that. The fifth are called the nonai, nons. And that's the ninth day before the idus. Why nonai? Well, because it's the ninth day before the idus. Okay, it's self-explanatory. Counting inclusively. So you have to count both the idus, the 13th, and the 5th. And then you will have 9 days. All right. If you count exclusively, the math won't add up. But if you count 13, 12, 11, 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, you have 9 days. Okay, you have to count inclusively. Idus, that's the 13th day. Ides. Maybe from the Etruscan iduare, which means maybe to divide. Why? Why people believe this is the etymology? Because the idus divide the months into 2 roughly equal parts. Okay, so the idus were supposed to be the middle of the month. So that's why people think, well, maybe from iduare, from the Etruscan iduare, to divide. But again, this is just a theory. People are not sure why it's called idus. Just notice, for grammar purposes, that this is actually a 4 declension plural. Idus, idum. All right? 4 declension, like exercitus, and so on. These words, kalendae, nonai, idus, are combined with the month names. All right? So they are like, they are combined with the month names, which function as adjectives. All right? But you knew that already because the month names are adjectives, right? So how do we indicate the 1st of January or the January the 1st? Well, we use kalendae because that's the first, and then we use the adjective Januarius agreed with the noun kalendae. Kalenda Januariae, that's the 1st of January, the January the 1st. January the 5th would be nonae Januariae. January 13th, idus Januariae. All right, so I know this seems a little bit confusing. Why? Well, the first one is kind of clear. Kalenda is always going to be the first of the month. Kalendae Januariae, kalendae Februariae, kalendae Martiae. That's always going to be the first. It could be confusing to see that the 5th is going to be the nonae because, nonae is going to make you think about the number 9. Just remember, it's called nonae, not because that's the 9th day of the month. It's because the nonae are the days 9 days before the idus. All right, so don't get confused by that. Don't get confused by the name. Nonae, because it comes 9 days before the idus. And the idus are going to be the middle of the month, roughly. Not precisely, of course, because the month doesn't have 26 days. Now, remember the ablative of time when, the ablativus temporis. So to say kalendae Januariae, that's just, the nominative subject. But if you want to say on the kalendae Januariae, Actually, this is wrong. This should be on January 1st. I'm sorry for this mistake, this typo. On January the 1st, you'd have to say calendis Januaris. All right? Why? Because you use the ablative of time when. Same thing with the, for example, the Ides of June or June the 13th. You have to say idibus Junis, and that's an ablative, ablativus temporis, ablative of time when. Okay, so just be aware of this. And you would be, maybe, I hope this is not too confusing, but if this is clear, you at this point know how to indicate 3 days of the month. And the months have many more days, right? So how did the Roman do that? Well, that's when the real problem begins. Before that, we use the Gregorian calendar now, which was reformed in the 16th century, right? That is in turn derived from the Julian calendar, the calendar that was derived from the Julius Caesar's reform in 46. And before that, the calendar was uneven in the sense that only March, May, July, and October had 31 days. February had 28, and all of the rest of the months, Ceteri menses, had just 29 days. By the way, this was equal to only 355 days. So they had to add 1 month every years. So that was quite confusing, by the way. That's why Julius Caesar wanted to reform the calendar, because it was really a mess with this extra month added sometimes. But the important thing here is that you remember that originally only March, May, July, and October had 31 days. That's why these months, March, May, July, and October, had the Ides, the Ides, the Idus, falling on the 15th, which is actually more close to the middle of the month. That's closer to the middle of the month. It's not exactly the middle, but it's closer to. And the nones were on the 7th. All right. Within this original structure, in the months that had 31 days, you can see that the Ides, Ides, the Idus and the Nonae, actually marked something more similar to our weeks, right? Because the Nonae was roughly, by the time you got to the Nonae, that was roughly 1 week. And by the time you got to the Ides, to the Idus, that was roughly 2 weeks, roughly the middle of the month. So that was more rational. But this reason, this system worked well only with these 4 months. And there is a little poem, mnemonic that may help you remember which months actually had this more, let's say, rational system. In March, July, October, May, the Ides fall on the 15th day. The nones, the 7th, all besides have 2 days less for nones and Ides. This never helped me, by the way. To me, it's just easier to try to remember the names, and that's it. But if this mnemonic helps you, I will be glad. Why is this important? Because this is, this that I told you before applies to all the rest of the months. So this applies to 8 months. The Nonae being the 5th and Idus being the 13th, applies to all the months except to these 4 months. All right, for these 4 months, the Idus fall on the 15th and the Nonae on the 7th. I know this is becoming confusing, but stay with me. Now, how do we actually express the date for the rest of the days? The remaining dates are expressed by stating the ordinal number of days before, that is using the preposition ante with the accusative, the next important day, calendae nonae or idus. So whenever you want to state a date, if it's not the calendae nonae or idus of that specific month, you will have to express it relative to the next important day. All right? Remember before that the Romans counted inclusively. They included both the starting day and the ending day in their calculation. We count, by the way, exclusively, typically. That's why I tell you that. For example, Rome's birthday, April 21, is the 11th day, and that's an ordinal, as you can see, 11th day before the calendae of May. That is, the April 21 is the 11th day before the 1st of May. before the calendar of May. So what's the point of reference to express the 21 of April? Well, the calendar, because that's the one that comes after. Okay, that's the point of reference to indicating this date. So what do? We say, well, the 21 of April is the dies undecimus, 11th day. You see, we use the ordinals here, before the calendae Maiae, ante calendas Maias, before the 1st of May. All right, so we don't simply count in Rome, in ancient Rome and in Latin, we don't simply count how many days you are into that month. We do that now. Okay, when we say April 21, we say 21 because that's how many days we are into the month. But the Romans were thinking forward. They were thinking how many days before the next important day. You see the difference? Well, and they were saying, well, 11 days before the next important day, which is the calendae Maiae. Dies undecimus ante calendas Maias. So that's a completely different system compared to what we use. Completely different and quite confusing if you ask me. And it's going to get worse. Because the Romans placed ante before, at the beginning of the term expressing the date. And all the rest of the words were in the accusative because they were following ante, and the preposition ante needs the accusative. So, ante diem undecimum calendas Maias. So you simply have to take the ante here, put it before everything, and then decline dies undecimus into the accusative, and actually keep the accusative in the calendas Maias, as it's this case. Why? I don't know why they did this, but what I can tell you is that they usually abbreviated this. So you had AD for ante diem, then you had the numeral here indicating the ordinal, and then you abbreviated the important day, cal, and you abbreviated the month, AD undecimum cal Mai. So that's how you actually express the date in Latin, by the way, abbreviated. All these things, then you have to unpack to understand what day that is. That sucks. But at least one silver lining is that in this abbreviation, actually, you completely avoid any kind of declension. You know that this should be an accusative, right? Of course, you have to know because everything comes after an ante, but you at least avoid declining anything, and you actually avoid all the case endings, right? Because you are using the numeral here, and you are truncating all the rest of the words in the abbreviation. So at least that. But again, you have to unpack this when you read this, all right? And you always have to know how many days you are not into the month, but how many days are left, counting inclusively, before the next important date, which is going to be either a calendae, a nonae, or an idus of the, sometimes, usually in the present month, if the point of reference is the nonae or the idus, and of the next month, if you are in the second half of the month, you're going to use the calendar of the next month. So the more confusing part of this is that when you are in the second half of the month after the idus, and you need to use the calendar, you need to use the ante calendas something, the confusing part is that you have to use the name of the next month to indicate a date in the previous month. Well, in the month that you are indicating, right? So to indicate April 21, you're actually using May. So this can confuse you. You can think, well, is this a day in May? No, it's a day in April. It's just that we have to use the calendar because we're in the second half of April. And that's the closest, that's the next important day. So that makes it confusing, right? Here I have a screenshot from page 312 of Familia Romana. This is going to make things easier, all right? In the sense that you can come here, see a day that you want to indicate. So first of all, you see the day. Then you think about the month. Which month are we? And then you see what the name is actually called. This sucks, as you can see, because there are many possibilities. Actually, for almost every day, more than half of the days of the year, there was a different way of saying it. Because look, let me try to explain to you this little by little. For the dates before the idus, in the months Januarius, Augustus, December, Aprilis, Junius, September, November, and Februarius, the way to indicate that number is going to be the same. To indicate, for example, let me make this more simpler. To indicate the 8th of August is going to be the same as to indicate the 8th of September and to indicate the same of February. You will just change the month. Ante idus or nonas, februarias, novembres, and so on. But for March, May, July, and October, that's going to change because remember, the idus are going to be not on the 13th, but on the 15th. So that's going to change. It's not going to be the same. That's why you don't have anything here. For this block here, it's going to be the same, all right? But it's going to change for this block of 4 months because the idus are moved 2 days later, right? And that changes everything. You see, the 2nd of September is 4 days before the nonai because the nonai are on the 5th. But the 2nd of July are 6 days before of the nonai because the nonai are on the 7th. You see, and same thing with the idus, by the way. The 8th, or well, say the 9th of December is going to be 5 days before the idus of December. But the 9th of October is going to be 7 days before the idus of October because the idus of October is on the 15th, not on the 13th. So it's a freaking mess. It's a freaking mess. And it gets even worse with the days after the idus because now you have as a reference the calendae. And the calendae, the number of days before the next calendae are going to change according to the length of the month. A longer month that has 31 days, like this block and this block, is going to start numbering the calendae with more days than these other months that have a shorter length. Let me explain that. The 14th of August, for example, is 90 days before the calendae of this month right here. But if you take the 14th of November, for example, that's going to be 18 days before the calendae of this month right here. Why? Because these months right here have 1 day less in their months, 13 and not 31. So diminishing the number changes the calendae or the number of days before the calendae. And that happens also with February. You see, 2 days less. So we start counting differently on the 14th for February, 16 days before the calendae of March. I hope I'm being clear, but this is a mess. I mean, there's no way around this. But I don't know what to tell you. This is a mess, and I'm sorry you have to learn this. I advise you to do some exercises as we will do now. One last thing to make things easier or more complicated according to the point of view. The day exactly before the calendae nona or idus, we don't say ante unum diem. We don't use that. We say pridie, which literally means the day before. We say pridie followed by the date in the accusative. So that's why you find here that before the calendae, we say that is the last day of the month, in this case, pridie calendas februarias. So pridie calendas februarias is 31 of January, the last day of January. Pridie idus novembres, pridie idus novembres is the day before the idus of November. Pridie nonas octobres is the day before the nonai of October. Okay, so that's why you don't see a 2 here. You don't see ante diem secundum. That's what I meant before. Ante diem secundum we don't use. We use pridie. So that's to complicate things or make them easier according to the point of view. All right. So let's practice now. let's give it some practice. Today is November 19. We go and check the day. 19th. We go and check the month. November. We're in this block of 30 days. We go and check the month. It is in this block of the months that have 30 days. And we have the date. Ante diem calendas, not Novembres. Not Novembres, remember with calendas, we use the next month. So ante diem calendas decembres. All right, and we abbreviated that as this. ante decimum tertium, ante diem decimum tertium calendas decembres. Now, Christmas, December 25. We're still in the second part of the month, right? So we are going to use the calendas of January. We identify the number 25. We go to the block. We're here. Ante diem octavum calendas Januarias. Ante diem octavum calendas Januarias. Okay, 8 days before the calendar of January, literally. July the 4th. That's an important date in the United States. So what do? We go look for the number 4. We look for the block where July is, Julius, and that's ante diem quartum nonas Julias. Ante diem quartum nonas Julias. And as you can notice, when you deal with dates before the nonae and the idus, that is in this part right here, roughly, again, the first half of the month, and in any way before the idus, the date of reference, either nonae or idus, are going to be agreeing or are going to be qualified, let's say, by the adjective of the month in which you are. All right, so don't let that confuse you. When the point of reference is the calendae, then the month name you use is the next one, because you are referencing the calendae, which are already a day in the next month. But when you are indicating a date before the nonae, before the idus, you remain within that nomenclature, let's say. So July, Julias, you see, but December, Januarias. Don't let that confuse you. June, the 9th. Once again, we look for the 9. We look for the block where June is, and that's here, Junius. Ante diem quintum idus Junias, because we are in June, right? So ante diem quintum idus Junias. And finally, February 28 or 29, you know, even at the time, the month of February could vary in length, just as now. But I chose this example on purpose because it really doesn't matter whether it's 28 or 29, because it's always going to be the day before the calendae Martiae. So it's always going to be pridie calendas Martias. You see? That's why I chose this example, precisely because it varies in our way of indicating the date, but it never varied actually in the way of indicating the date in Latin. So that's it. This is how you give the date in Latin using the Roman calendar. As you can see, it's quite a pain. It's quite a pain, but it's something you should practice slowly. I repeat, this is something that both beginners and advanced students alike struggle with. So what I recommend you is to use learn to use this table slowly, and then try to count. Then try to use, let's say, the inductive method and try to count on your own. All right, just remember inclusive counting. One fun suggestion maybe for you to practice the dating is to actually send emails and add the date of that email in Latin. That's a fun idea, maybe. A little bit geek, but why not?